Good morning, fourth graders. I am going to start this slideshow here so we can take a look at this as I walk us through what we're going to do today for our reading mini lesson. So yesterday we read the story Casey Jones. In this tall tale, the author used many interesting phrases that it includes specially selected vocabulary words or even figurative language to help us to visualize what was happening in the story. Probably a few months back, we were doing figurative language together. We were figuring out what are the different uses of figurative language and how do authors use them in their writing. Today we are going to reread some of the excerpts from the text. We're going to use a variety of strategies to try to figure out what are the meanings of these phrases. So I want us to think really carefully about the phrases that you see up on the screen. And I want us to think about what is happening at that point in the tall tale and how does that phrase help us to visualize the setting, the characters, and the events. Also, what clues and evidence did the author provide to help us to figure out the meaning of the phrase in that particular story? So let's take a look at the first phrase, let his imagination take him away. That was found on page 105. And what it means in the story, Casey feels like he is in another place. He's visualizing what it would be like to be a train engineer, makes it seem pretty real. So some clues and evidence, it tells us he closed his eyes and he could hear the train speeding down the tracks, the whistle blowing. So he's allowing his imagination to take him away so that way he feels like he is in another place. He's able to visualize what it would be like to be a train engineer, and he can hear the train speeding down the tracks. He can hear the whistle blowing. So if you close your eyes and imagine that, you can visualize a train speeding down the tracks, the sound of the whistle blowing in the background. Okay, let's move on to the next phrase, like a Viking war cry. Well, since we live in Minnesota, we know what the sound of a Viking war cry would sound like when we hear the Minnesota Vikings play. They'll make that huge sound with that instrument that they have on the field. And that's actually a simile. So the reason why we know it's a simile is because it's using the words like or as. So it's saying that it's like a Viking war cry. So this simile compares the sound of a train whistle to the sound of ancient warriors or the Vikings frightening their enemies away with their loud cries. Okay? And the clues and the evidence within the story would have told us on page 106. The author begins with how the whistle sounds when Casey first leaves the station, softly like a whip pour while singing tweet, 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 and builds up to the way it sounds when the train is at full speed using the synonym shriek. Shriek! All right, so they made it sound like it was a Viking war cry, a very loud sound. Let's move on to our next phrase, Casey's signature. That would have been on page 106 as well. So if we look at what it means in the story, the way Casey uses the train whistle in his distinctive characteristic is something that identifies him to people along the route. So they say that it's his signature. So you might know of a basketball player or a football player that has a signature move after they make a touchdown. It's theirs. Like we know that although you might not enjoy the Packers or love the Packers, you know about the Lambeau Leap. That is their signature. It's their move that they make when they score a touchdown. So Casey had his signature, and we know that we can look at the clues and evidence in the story. When the children heard a train called tweet, 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 then screech, shriek, shriek, they would say Casey's coming through because they knew that he was coming to town based off of his signature that he had. Moving on to our next phrase on page 107 where it said to stick around. Okay, that's an idiom, and that means to stay where you are. So the people want Casey to remain at the station a little bit longer, and we know that they want him to stick around because the clues or the evidence in the story, they ask him to have his picture taken for the newspaper. So please stick around. It doesn't mean to physically stay stuck to the ground. It means stay for a little bit longer. And then the last phrase that I want to go over with you today is on page 107, we read, the old girl's got her dancing slippers on. All right, so does that mean that she physically puts on her slippers? And what are we talking about? The old girl. We're not talking about a girl here. We're talking about a train, and she's wearing her dancing slippers. Can trains wear dancing slippers? No. Let's see what they mean by that. So what it means in the story is this is a metaphor in which Casey compares the speeding train to a dancer. He calls the train girl once more on page 108, where he says to her, "Steady, girl." So he's telling that object, he's referring to it as a person, which it's not, okay? It's a train. And then the clues and the evidence from the story tell us Casey gave the order from Simweb for Fireman to shovel at double speed. The cannonball picked up speed, 30 miles per hour, 50 miles per hour, 70 miles per hour. We're moving at a fine clip. So what they mean by that is that the old girl's got her dancing slippers on and she's able to move pretty quickly. They used a metaphor in that case, okay? So I want us to just talk about a little bit about how these phrases can be tricky. So today we dug into this tall tale a little bit deeper and we started to look closely at how the author would use these phrases to make the story more interesting. So one reason that authors will do this is they want to help us be able to better visualize and understand the really important events that are taking place in the story. Okay, and we also kind of did some summarization as far as the strategies that we have in our reader's toolbox that we can use anytime we're struggling to understand. We can dive deeper into the story, and it helps us just to enjoy the genre of the story more. So today we focused on different phrases that were in the story, what it meant in the story, and what were some of the clues and evidence that were given in the story. We talked a little bit about similes and metaphors. We talked about idioms, which are all different types of figurative language that can help us to understand stories better. All right, that will wrap up our lessons for this week. There is no day 5 lesson because we only have 4 days of school. So go ahead and you can do a reading to self of a book of choice. You can do epic for 20 minutes, or you could do read theory for 20 minutes. There is no additional activity today.